You're spending money where people aren't spending their time, and then you're not spending money where people are spending their time.
We drive them into these landing pages. We probably built some of these landing pages 4 years ago, maybe on our lunch break, and yet we're expecting them to perform really well.
Why do you think such an imbalance exists?
Google have a lot to be answerable to. And what I mean by that is,
on today's episode, we'll be talking to Stuart Rex. He's commercial director at WebTrends Optimize. We'll be talking to Stuart about the ad platforms and how they're beginning to give real attention to the post-click experience. We'll be talking to him about landing pages and how landing pages can play a key role in optimizing that post-click experience. Then we'll be talking about experimentation, how marketers can overcome their fears and really get engaged with experimentation using it as a tool for decision-making. We're also going to talk about some of the culpability that Google and Meta and other ad platforms have in creating some of these issues and fears that marketers have to wrestle with today. We're excited as always. Let's get started. Stuart, thank you so much for being on the show today. We're really excited to have you and excited about this episode.
yeah, thanks, Shamir. Yeah, it's something I've been doing a lot of talks about recently, looking at that paid media continuation piece, and it's something I'm really keen to kind of dive into a bit deeper with yourself and the Smart Panda Labs team.
You know, we think our audience is really interested in hearing more about this because, as you know, we talk a lot about the import of this post-click experience, right? It's where people spend the majority of their time in the digital experience. It's where they're making their decisions in the digital experience. And yet we constantly see this imbalance, and you talk about it a lot, between how much is spent on advertising, on getting people to the post-click experience, and how much is actually spent improving and optimizing that post-click experience, which seems really weird. You're spending money where people aren't spending their time, and then you're not spending money where people are spending their time. So I'm curious to know your thoughts, Stuart. Why do you think such an imbalance exists?
So, let's start candidly, because that's what we've always done, right? In our whole relationship together, Shamir, we've always been candid. And Google we've got a lot to thank Google for, and they've also got a lot to explain for. And I think in this one, they've got a lot to be answerable to. And what I mean by that is, we account to Google, to Meta, to all the other paid platforms to bring traffic into us. And for a long, long time now, it's been the digital marketer's best friend. It's been the drug that we've all relied on. It's got people into the sites. It's got people into the experience. And it's helped us to convert. And it's really easy to say, we've spent X on ads, and that's led to Y in sales. And so for marketers there are many parts of the digital marketing process and the marketing process in general that you can say, well, it's worth us doing this because of whatever. And paid has been one of the few things where you can say, we've put X in and we've got Y out. And you can attribute that back to a paid experience that's taken someone into the page. So as marketers, we've become really reliant on that drug. And we've said, okay, we need to be spending more over here because we can see where that traffic's coming from. We can see the results that come off the back of it. And therefore, we should be putting more into this. And I feel like in the last kind of 18 to 24 months, we've started to see a bit of a shift. And what I'm meaning by that is we're seeing cost per click getting more expensive. We're seeing more competition in paid. We're seeing more diversification across paid channels. And it's becoming much harder to justify continuing to put more budget into paid when we're ultimately seeing lower returns on ad spend. And so what we've never really done as marketers is to take a step back and to say, wait a minute, we're spending all this money to get people coming in. We drive them into these landing pages. We probably built some of these landing pages 3-4 years ago, maybe on our lunch break. They've not necessarily had the highest level of consideration. And yet we're expecting them to perform and perform really well. And we're not necessarily looking at the keyword level when we're buying traffic. We're looking right down to the semicolon level. What is the best performing ad copy? What's the best thing that's going to get the high converting audiences into these pages? And then the paid team's going to go, cool, job done. Over to you, team. And you've then got the CRO teams who kind of deal with stuff that's mid-funnel, down to basket and checkout. But the really unloved bit is kind of the most important step in the funnel, in my view. That first post-click experience, you've clicked into the ad, you've got a high level of intent, you've landed somewhere, and you land on a completely irrelevant landing page, or you've landed on a landing page that might be there for 10, 20, 30 keywords. And it might not be at all relevant to what you really searched for, but it's the most relevant page the company's got. And it just feels like such a big opportunity that most businesses are missing. And if we look across, our client base, we're probably looking at the top 5 to 10% of our clients, and some of them, are obviously shared with yourselves at Smart Panda Labs, who are really looking at where the opportunity exists between that pre-click experience. What ads are people coming in on? What intent have they got? What audiences are they? What demographics are they coming from? What do we as a business need to talk to them about to then get them to look at their North Star metric, which is to ultimately get through that landing page and into whatever that next step of the funnel is? That, I think, is where the biggest opportunity is. And so many marketers overlook it because it's not the sexy bit of marketing. It's not the fun thing to be doing. It's the dirty work that goes on behind the scenes that gets people between one stage and the next. And I think it's something that we all need to be looking at much more. I think it's something that is so easy to ignore because it's much more difficult to say, we got someone onto the page, and then how many went from that step to the next step in the funnel? Once you kind of get past that, you can go, well, we've got all this traffic coming in, and then someone who's engaged with a product listing page, someone who's engaged with a product description page, we know they've got a high level of intent, so we can nudge them at that point. But actually, people who've come in, they've got some level of interest or of intent, and we need to understand that, and we need to work out how we can get people in. And so I'm slightly overly passionate on this, but I think it's something that we really should be looking at.
As you well know, I share your passion. I mean, this is a problem, and it seems to be a growing problem, just industry wide. Not to minimize the work of advertisers, because certainly there's a lot of intelligence, there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of nuance in advertising. But when all is said and done, advertising is easy. It's traffic. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Traffic is easy. I can get traffic. Anyone can get traffic. The plumber down the street who's opening up the shop, I mean, it only takes 10 minutes and a credit card for him to start driving traffic to his site, right? Getting customers is hard, right? That's the trick. And I think what happens is that nuance between saying, hey, I'm driving traffic, and then how do I turn that traffic into customers? That's where the complexity comes in. As you mentioned, that part isn't sexy. It's dirty work. It's this alignment, especially in the enterprise, between product and IT and marketing that can be so difficult to really bring into alignment and be able to get that to actually happen the way that organizations need it to create customers, never mind to create customer retention, to drive lifetime value, and to do those even further down the line metrics that we could begin talking about. And yet, I think what's happening in the market, at least from the Googles and the Metas of the world, is that they're recognizing is, hey, we're raising our costs. We're making it more expensive for people to be able to generate customers. And eventually, we're going to reach a point where it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to get some of these costs justified. We already know CFOs are already kind of, itemizing those issues and saying, I'm not seeing the kind of return here we should be.
In the last kind of 18 months, 2 years, I think we've hit that point where cost per click, by the time that you look at the full funnel, I think we've hit the point where it no longer makes sense to just chuck more in the top, because the costs to buy that traffic are becoming so high, and the chances of converting them based on the sites that were converting well enough when we were paying half the price per click is no longer there.
I think that's 100% the point. And I think what's most interesting about it is, I think the Googles and the Metas have caught on to that and are saying to themselves, we need to some degree, give a little more attention to the post-click experience, because if these people aren't turning into customers at a reasonable rate, then it's going to be like, well, why are we spending all this money on advertising? Perhaps we should be doing other things. perhaps we should be going with more own channels, more own content, more organic channels, more PR, whatever those things are that aren't necessarily driving revenue for Google and Meta, right? So you see things like Google with their quality score, right? And how they're saying, hey, I want to give you more credit for creating a better post-click experience, right? So as you kind of look at that happen, how do you feel like digital marketers can better leverage those levers that the Googles of the world put into play for those better post-click experiences?
It's a really good question, because if we also look back to when Google removed Google Optimize from the market, that was a point where they kind of took away the one thing they were giving to us, where we could look at the end-to-end process and say, we're going to test the post-click experience using Google Optimize, and we're going to do these things, and we'll see some kind of. I mean, we all know the tool was never perfect, but it gave the market something, right? It gave everyone the ability to test for free, and I think that being taken away at the same time where Google's putting an increased importance on their quality score metric, which we know is a bit of a black box, right? And it is kind of a double-edged sword. And what we're seeing now is a real disparity in the market between, it's kind of like the haves and the have-nots. So those who have a testing program and who are looking at multiple metrics, and we'll come back to those metrics in a minute, and those who are kind of like, I'm just going to pump cash into paid, and we're going to hope at the other end that enough comes out that we make enough on our cost per click, on our average customer value, on our AOVs. Like, if we can deal with that stuff, the business probably makes sense. And you've got those two businesses, one that's very data driven, one that's more like, yeah, it's probably okay. Like, it makes kind of sense at this point. And what we're seeing more and more clients and agencies in particular doing is looking at bridging those pre and post click metrics. So your pre-click metrics, you've got return on ad spend and cost per click. They're your two obvious ones. You've got quality score as kind of a bridging metric, if you like. That's something that sort of sits in the middle. You don't really know everything that affects it, but you've got some kind of idea that Google's either happy that the traffic's coming in is doing what you intend, and therefore they reward you with that. And that often then leads to lower cost per click, higher return on ad spend, etc. You've then got your post-click metrics, and in a kind of testing world, these can be any metrics that you care about on the page. Are they engagement metrics? So are people scrolling? Are they engaging in content? Are they completing your North Star metric, which may or may not be to complete a lead form? It might be to add something to basket. It could be whatever that North Star metric is. And what we're seeing more and more people doing is saying, wait, if we align these two worlds that actually Google historically has kept separate, they've kept the paid team separate from the organic team, and we as businesses have responded to that to say, okay, cool, that's a paid specialism, that's an organic specialism, instead of saying, no, this is a demand gen problem. Like, we need people to be coming in, and we need to be looking at the number of people that come in, what they're doing on page, where those friction points are, and then trying to remove those. And if you look at the kind of end-to-end journey, that's the bit that I feel like most businesses have sort of either lent into through testing programs, or they've shied away from, because actually it's a little bit uncomfortable, and it's a little bit revealing to say, we might do something that doesn't work. And that can be really difficult for businesses to acknowledge back to their stakeholders, to say, we thought this might work, and actually, like, it didn't. Or it might have worked really well. They might have found a really high converting audience, but you've put them into the wrong landing page. And we haven't looked at that post-click experience and what those people are doing. And it might mean that actually we need a specific landing page for a smaller subset of keywords. And what we're not doing enough of, in my view, is looking at that end-to-end journey. What have people come into the site for? What are they looking for? Are we meeting their needs? And are they doing the thing that we need them to do? And I think what we're starting to see, and I know Smart Panda Labs are looking at this as some other agencies are, is how do we try and say to our customer base, to the market in general, you cannot any longer separate pre and post click experience. Like the two are far too joined up. And certainly that first click, that North Star metric on the landing page, in my view, needs to be accountable to the source of media that it came in from. Once someone goes in deeper into the site, once they start engaging further, in my mind, that's then a fair game for the wider teams. But you've got to be rewarded with the lower cost per click, higher return on ad spend, increase in quality score. You've got to be looking at that first post-click North Star metric.
The word that I really like that you used there was reward, right? There has to be that positive feedback, as it were, a bit of a positive feedback loop throughout the entire process. And when you think about it, I mean, customers need that, right? I mean, you could do all the advertising in the world, but if you go back to the kind of the old brick and mortar model that we really grew up with, right? When we were young, when we were kids, that experience in the store mattered substantially. It doesn't matter how great the TV ad or the radio ad was that got you to the store. If you couldn't find what you were looking for, if you didn't get a good salesperson at the store, if you couldn't check out in a timely way, all those points were points of friction that ultimately, if you just end up walking out, then what was the point of the great commercial, right? What was the point of the great ad? It was pointless, right? The entire experience matters. It's why companies spend so much money designing the layout of their stores, right? Testing those layouts of their stores, because that experience matters, because that's where people are actually doing the shopping. That's where they were taking out their credit cards. That's where they were spending money. So for companies not to recognize it's the same thing today, it's just more digital, perhaps, than it was brick and mortar, than it was back maybe a generation ago, the principle and the mindset of the customer is exactly the same. And you've got to understand that, except now in the digital world, we have this opportunity that was much more complicated and costly in the physical world, where we can try different things and see what does and doesn't work. And we can learn much faster than we were ever able to before, than a company was able to before, when they were stuck in the mold of brick and mortar. And you touched on it. A lot of times companies will begin to maybe go down that road of experimentation and say, okay, how do we begin to learn and do this better on these landing page experiences? But then they can become quickly overwhelmed by the complexities of experimentation, right? I mean, if you follow people who are into A/B testing and experimentation online, it could become very intimidating very fast. I mean, they're talking about, sample size and ratio mismatch and minimum detectable effect. And it's like, I don't understand all that stuff. I mean, that's the stuff in school that I skipped, in math class. And it's like, it kind of shuts you down. It becomes kind of paralysis, and you don't end up doing it at all. So how have you found it helpful to help marketers say, here's how you get started with experimentation. Here's how you get started with learning and improving these experiences?
I think what we're seeing on that, Shamir, is like two sides of a very similar coin. So, there's huge barriers to overcome in terms of understanding the A/B testing process. And there's also huge opportunity in just doing something. And if you think about a physical store, you've got one chance to get the design of that right. And you've got to make a compromised decision to make that appeal to as many of your potential customer bases as possible. Within an online environment, most of the good stores that we go to are personalizing to us in ways that we don't even notice or recognize, because they're doing it very subtly. They might be spotting things that we regularly buy. I'm wearing a white t-shirt under this jumper today. Like, I might regularly buy white t-shirts from this particular store. And they would know that. They know that I don't buy purple t-shirts necessarily, but they'd see that I always buy white t-shirts. So they might just reinforce a white t-shirt back to me. And that could be something that's a really subtle personalization that I'm never going to spot. We're not talking about, hey, Shamir, how are you? Nice to see you again. We saw you were here 7.5 days ago. We're plus 4 hours. Like, no one needs that kind of level of personalization. We're talking more about the subtle stuff that tailors what the site is to you to make it as relevant to you as it can. And I think that's the sort of things that we're starting to see more and more people doing well. And there's multiple sides of personalization, and it's probably one for another conversation. But the barrier to overcoming it and the fear of doing that, I've touched on personalization there, but actually like testing anything, if we're going to go and put something live on the store, we're going to go and change the way that all of our images are merchandised. We're going to go from a kind of blank background to a in context background of whatever products it is we're stocking. Now, some of our audience might react really well to that. And some of our audience may completely pull away from that. They may like being able to see things in isolation. And if we haven't tested that and we haven't understood the audiences, the demographics, the people that are looking at things, never mind sample rate mismatch and all the other things that you can get stuck in the detail of with some of the very bright minds of our industry, you've missed the goal. Like, you've totally missed the goal. If you're doing something and measuring the big stuff, the big metrics that you care about, and you're looking at the stuff that really matters, are we seeing an increase in the number of people that come to our site, turning into an increase in sales? And can we attribute that to one variant or another, or whatever kind of test design you've come up with? Can we see where in the funnel people are hitting that friction point? And can we address those problems? Can we make changes, adjust traffic one way or another through an A/B test, through a split test, through a multivariate test, through whatever kind of method you want? Can we spot that one KPI we care about? And can we therefore try and improve against that? And is that better than doing nothing? Well, 100%. Like, if we do that, back to the earlier point, we will see an improvement in the way that Google views us as a website. And therefore, we will get that reward that we talked about of lower cost per click, higher return on ad spend. And we can also then measure which things are working, which things are not. And the thing I find most crazy, Shamir, is CRO, A/B testing, call it whatever you want, experimentation is one of the very few things in digital marketing that you can literally measure to the finest degree cause and effect of. Yet it's one of the things that digital marketers seem to fear the most, because it provides a lens into what you're thinking at that point in time and therefore creates accountability. And I think that's one of the big things that we've got to try and overcome, is to be able to say to our senior stakeholders, I know roughly the direction we want to go. I know how to get from A to B, but I don't know every step we need to take on the journey. I don't know how every audience we have is going to respond to us changing that product imagery example. I don't know how they might respond to us changing the way we describe our content. I don't know how they might change to respond to a change in layout. There's so many things that you could go and ask a handful of people. They'd give you an answer, but their behavior may be totally different. And the only way you ever find that out is through testing. So the responsible thing as a business to do is to say, we've paid a lot of money. I think numbers I saw, £262 billion last year spent on Google Ads, compared to a relative 20 odd billion spent globally on experimentation. There's a huge mismatch. We talked about that. If you said, I'm going to try and balance that, and I'm actually going to look at, spending 40% on improving the traffic that comes into the experience for the traffic that comes into our site, and we're going to reduce the ad spend down to 60%. And we're going to just try and drive traffic in there, and we're going to improve that process. It feels like an argument for common sense. And I think this is almost the bit that becomes difficult, is you're arguing for common sense. You're saying, we're not going to get everything right. What human in life can ever say they've got everything right? And if you ask people at a human level, they know that they're never going to get everything right. But you ask them in business and they have to present this bravado, this confidence, like, we're going in that direction. It's the direction our customers want. And most of the time they don't know. And that's okay. But prove it. Prove it with data. Have the confidence. We get pushback sometimes from people who don't want to start, saying it's going to slow our processes down. We can get features out within X amount of time. It's like, cool, but are they features people care about? Are they actually helping you achieve the metrics that you care about and the things that you're bonused on, that you're commissioned on? Like, or, or are you just busy fools? And we see examples of, I mean, the one that scared me most is that 4 in 5 things that people push out without testing make no difference to their KPI metrics. If I was to turn up to you, Shamir, and say, "Hey, Shamir, I'm here for a new job. Uh, 4 out of the 5 things I'm going to do this week, 4 out of 5 days, I might as well just go to the golf course." Is that okay? How would you feel about that, Shamir? Like, yes, exactly. But without experimentation, that's pretty much what I'm going to do. When you start then seeing success rates of 50%, you see 33%, we start seeing improvements there. And we then start looking at the things that are making a difference. And I say to you, Shamir, I'm going to turn up. I'm not going to know everything that's right, but I know the direction we're headed. I know the KPIs we're aiming at. And as long as we're making improvements towards those, is that okay? Again, feels like an argument for common sense.
Right at the beginning of our conversation, you used an analogy that advertising is like a drug. And it really is, right? Because when you think about it, you know, someone's dealing with stress, anxiety in life, and they decide to turn to drugs to do that because it's a quick fix, right? It feels like, okay, I get this immediate high. This is for this moment, it feels like it's solving my problem. And advertising does. Sales are down, turn up the ad spend, right? We're driving more traffic. More of that traffic is, likely you're gonna generate more customers. It's likely gonna happen, right? The rate at which it happens, that's all debatable, but it's likely going to happen. It's a quick fix, right? But you're not solving the root problem, right? You're not dealing with your anxiety and your problems in life. You're turning to this drug. It's a quick fix, and then the high goes down. And now what you need? You need another hit, right? You need to go back to the drug again, and then all of a sudden you're addicted. As opposed to saying, well, if I go back and I address the problems in my life, the sources of anxiety and the sources of stress, well, that's going to take a little bit more time, but the benefit will be significantly longer term, right? It's going to be more meaningful and more impactful in my life. And it's the same thing with experimentation, right? When you're going back and you're looking at the actual post experience and you're dealing with those issues, does it take a little bit more time? It does. Is it more complicated? It is. But you're addressing longer term issues, right? You're addressing things that are not only going to affect your advertising traffic, but your email traffic and your organic traffic and just general brand traffic, right? All those things are going to be impacted by what you're doing. And ultimately, we frame this thing as like CRO, like, this is going to make you more money and so forth. And in the aggregate, it does. But really, it's not going to be that direct one-to-one relationship you might see in Meta or in Google when you turn up the ad spend and you see it, driving more conversions. What you're really doing is you're making better decisions for yourself, right? You're not grasping at straws. You're not searching in the dark anymore. You're shining a flashlight on things and you're making better decisions about where I should go and where I should look and how I find a doorway and how I move through the door and and so forth. It's a decision engine, and I think that's part of the problem, right? We're not framing experimentation CRO in the right way. We're framing it as this thing that's like, oh, you do this and it's going to drive more revenue, instead of saying, no, this mentality is helping you to make better decisions. And that's ultimately what we want, because as marketers, we're so used to throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. It becomes a way of saying, why are we wasting time doing that? Let's have some framework, some methodology here to make a better, a more intelligent decision that's going to lead us down the right path and allow us to get to solving more of those root problems, right? And that becomes a challenge that we have to, as an industry, kind of shift that mentality and mindset and really educate marketers about how they can do that.
100%. I literally can't add anything more useful to that, because it is 100% the problem and the solution. It's just something that we've been trained, I guess, by the media of the world, that you buy more media, you get more traffic, instead of going, flip the lens, look internally. Are you capitalizing on that traffic or not? And sometimes you might look at it and say, do you know what? For these landing pages, we're doing a pretty good job. We're getting X% conversion rate on keywords that we believe should be, fairly low converting. We're doing all right. And that's okay. That might be the case. But I don't know that I've ever come across a business where they can look across their entire portfolio of landing pages and landing page experiences and say there isn't work to do here. And the brave businesses are those that look at it and say, we acknowledge there's work to do here. We're not just going to take the drug. We're not just going to go and buy more ad spend. We're actually going to go and tackle these things, because the other bit that we've not really talked about here is you pay for that traffic once to come in. Now, how many people convert on their first entry into a site? Like, depending on the service, the product, whatever it is you're selling, very few people are ready to buy on that first experience. If you're reliant on that drug, the paid drug, there's a very high chance that you're going to pay not once, not twice, not 3 times. Like, it could be more. And then your attribution becomes even worse. And this is sort of the other bit. It's like, if we can get people through that funnel, further into that funnel, we can capture their data, we can understand who they are, we can remarket to them, we can get back to them without having to go back to the paid channel. We're making life measurably better for the business in multiple layers. And this is the sort of the bit that I think some of our more forward-thinking brands, customers, and as you know, we share some of them, are looking at this and saying, this is the big opportunity for us right now. It's not to spend more. It's not to necessarily, dismiss the work that the product team are doing on testing features. It's to acknowledge that we need to be accountable as a business for that traffic that comes into us to maximize that one-time opportunity. If we can't get the sale today, let's at least get an email address and remarket to them. Let's get them to connect with our socials and we can retarget them that way. Like, let's try and get something from this paid expenditure that we can look back on and say, there's some form of value from that X dollar click that we've paid for. And that's I think the bit that many marketers haven't yet really cottoned onto. Like, you can't always get the end goal first time. But if you can't get that, let's get something. Let's get something, some value for that money that we've paid to Google, to Meta, to the other ad providers out there.
If you're speaking to these marketers, they're thinking about experimentation, A/B testing, CRO, whatever they call it. They're thinking about getting started. Kind of, what's your step-by-step playbook, right? What's kind of the 2 or 3 things you would tell them? Hey, look, here's where you can get started to start getting value today, right? Here's where you can get started without getting overwhelmed by the complexity of it. That may come as you mature, years down the road, but here's where you can get started today and actually begin to get value and say, you could start making better decisions.
So my challenge here, Shamir, is that it feels like an argument for common sense, which is always a difficult thing to argue for. And in terms of a playbook, the big challenge with this, as you appreciate, is every business is different. Every business has got different objectives, different means to an end. But if we look at it, whether you're a charity, whether you're an e-commerce business, whether you're an insurer, whether you're in finance, ultimately you need more people to do the thing that you want them to do. So in terms of a playbook, you look at what traffic people are coming in on, what are the ads that they're arriving from, what things are piquing their interest. How can we make the content on page immediately relevant to those people, either through better landing pages or through personalization or through whatever other means we have available to us, through CDP, through any of the data sources that we might have. There are things that we will be able to do today to make that experience potentially more relevant to those people. And you pick the lowest hanging fruit of those and you start testing. So it might be that through the CDP, we know that someone is an existing customer. Cool. Right. What have they bought before? White t-shirts. Great. Okay. They always buy white t-shirts from us. They don't buy purple t-shirts. Let's show them white t-shirts. That might be really difficult data to get hold of. And if it is, we might just know that they've come in having done a Google search through the UTM parameter for white t-shirts. Or we can take that same information and serve them white t-shirts. Like, there might be other ways that we can leverage that data to try and make things relevant for them. And I think that the thing here is you look at what that customer wants to achieve. So say I'm buying insurance. I've come in, I'm looking at house insurance, I'm looking at contents insurance plus buildings insurance. I've got a clear, defined, I've given you through my Google search, contents plus buildings insurance in the UK, as an example. I'm going to get some relevant businesses. I'm going to click through. My UTM parameter is going to tell you that information. stick me on a page for content and buildings insurance. Like, if you're not doing that bit, there's really no excuse. And that's the argument for common sense. If you can't do that, make my experience as good as possible. Ask me what I'm here for today. Give me a checkbox. Give me something that I can tick to say contents plus buildings, contents insurance, buildings insurance, either or. Like, I just need to speak to someone because I'm incapable of answering a basic question. Like, make it easy for your lowest common denominator. Whatever the hardest thing to achieve is, make it easy for that person to say, I don't fit these boxes. I need to speak to a human. If you can't speak to a human, speak to a chatbot. Find a way of trying to make this experience easy. The US are incredible at customer service. That is the bread and butter of what the US is great for. You use most websites and they fall at that same hurdle. If you go to a restaurant, you go and dine out in the US, you'll get amazing customer service pretty much everywhere you go. And that rarely translates online. And so just think about, as a customer, I come here wanting to buy contents and home insurance. This business has made it so difficult for me to literally understand what you offer, let alone how to even speak to you. Like, why am I going to bother? I'm going to go to someone that makes it really easy. Back to my lowest common denominator. I want to achieve this outcome. I want contents and business insurance and buildings insurance. Just make my life easy. If you can't deliver that, find a way of capturing that information and make it easy for them another way. And I think if you can do that step in the journey, you're doing better than most businesses out there who aren't even thinking about this.
I think you boiled it down well, right? It comes down to saying, number one, how do you immediately provide relevance to the person who's coming to say, I'm in the right place based on what the click was that brought me here, right? How do you connect those ends of the story, right? So whether it was save 20%, whether it was white t-shirts, whether it was auto insurance, wherever the case was, when I get there, where am I seeing, okay, I search for auto insurance. This is okay, a place to get auto insurance. I search for white t-shirts. Okay, here are white t-shirts, right? I saw an ad, this is 20% off. Okay, I see right here. This is where I get 20% off, right? So how do I make it relevant? And then how do you begin now to orient that person and say, and here are the products that you want. Here are the selection. Here's the choices that you're looking for, right? And once you do that, then it's about just saying, not even at this point, still even saying, okay, now I'm ready to buy. It's just like, what's the next logical step? Well, the next logical step is for me to add that to my cart, or to wish list it, or whatever makes sense for your business and your customer and your business cycle, right? What's the action, the next logical action for me to take? And let's optimize toward that, right? Just doing those three things, like relevance, orientation, next logical step. Those three steps will get people farther than probably 95% of online businesses today, just by just orienting to those things and testing your way and defining what the best way is. Just even just for the majority of people, what works for the majority of people. You can break that down by audiences and do that all day, but just looking and saying what works for the majority of people is going to move you in the right direction. And then it's going to give you, by the time you're done, 20 more directions in which you could go to begin to, to really grow and iterate on top of that. But I think great playbook, great three things to start on.
So few businesses are doing that if you are making these changes and you then look at those pre and post click metrics and you say, is this making a difference? Is it not? The other big part of the playbook is not just doing these things, it's measuring it and saying, are we doing better? And if you are, then great. And if you're not, then that's fine as well. You need to iterate on that plan. And that, I think, is something that so few businesses are doing, because they're all looking at these problems as siloed issues. We've got a paid problem, we've got a conversion problem, we've got an organic problem. And actually, you've just got an end-to-end challenge, and you've got multiple points that people can fall in and out of the process. And you've got to look at that total funnel and say, where is the biggest opportunity right now? And when you find that big opportunity, you look, there might be 3, 4, 5, 10 solutions. So you say, okay, what one feels right for us? And you might not have the data to say, it's this solution, it's that solution. If you've got it, great. If not, test something. And then if that doesn't work, then test the next thing. Test that against, and then just iterate and improve. And this is kind of the main message, I think, in all of this is, you might have really high potential, high converting audiences that the paid teams are finding. you're pushing them into a poor experience. And you're saying back to the paid teams, well, those audiences aren't converting, but you're not necessarily, I used the term earlier, flipping the microscope, flipping the periscope, whatever it is, to go and say, are we serving the needs of those audiences for these things? And I think that's the big takeaway in all of this, is looking back from a customer's perspective and saying, if I'd come looking for auto insurance, white t-shirts, whatever it might be, am I landing somewhere that makes sense? Is that experience telling me that you as a business are the right people for me as a customer to buy from? And if the answer to that is, I'm not quite sure, then there's work to do. And the ways you solve those problems can be, there's endless numbers of ways of solving it. But if you don't look at those KPI metrics and look at the ways you solve those problems, then you're never going to go and improve. You can take an arrogant view and say, I know best, I know what my customers need. And many businesses do that. They miss huge opportunities in doing so. And I think that is my ultimate point in this whole conversation is, if you test it, you can prove the value of the idea, you can prove the value of the execution of that idea, and you can therefore iterate on it. If you just say we're going that way, you won't know the effect of the good or bad of those decisions until you try and wash them up amongst all the other things that you've done as a business in that quarter, that month, whatever it might be.
No, I think that's an excellent point. Around here, we talk a lot about the importance of being people-driven over even data-driven. And keeping in mind, this is a person that we're talking about. And people don't care about return on ad spend. People don't care about whether or not it came from Meta or organic search or an email, right? What people care about is, I'm searching for this thing because I have this particular need, or maybe you've stimulated a need, and now I need to fill it. I need to get more information. I need to make a decision. Right? For people, that's essentially what's happening. So looking at it through that particular lens is going to give you a bit of clarity, because now it's like people are going to bounce around and they're going to go and they're going to come back, and whatever the case is. And it's just like, how are you constantly, again, making it relevant? How are you constantly reorienting them to where they are? How are you constantly moving them to say, what is the next logical step to make this decision and ultimately go down and make that purchase that you hope that they end up making? And to your point, it's going to take trial and error to do that, because people are different. People are changing. The market's changing. Competitors are changing. So it's in a state of constant flux. So if you don't have some framework and methodology to constantly be adapting and evolving and changing with it, how can you possibly keep up? You're not being people driven, right? You're not being people oriented. And I think that is really the message. And it's an excellent one that you made. Stuart, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate this. Appreciate you buying out the time to chat, and I appreciate the great insights you gave us today.
Yeah, thanks, Samir, for having me. Really appreciate it.